Hello my fiery friends, the Infernoman here with the hottest in budget deck technology. And for today's deck tech, we're finally covering the last clan on the plane of Tarkir ever since we've returned thanks to the set of Dragonstorm. So, without further ado, join me today in the Explorer format for a deck that I am simply calling Jeskai Prowess. But before we continue, if you do like any of the content that I do, please like, follow, and subscribe wherever you watch the content. You can support me monthly for a small amount on Patreon, where I have all of my extended bonus footage posted. We also have a Redbubble spot where you can buy merch like stickers and shirts, or for free, all you can just do also is just join our growing community on Discord. Your support helps keep this channel going. All links are in the details below. Longtime viewers of the channel know how we do it. We have to talk about the stats of the deck before we dive right in. So our Jeskai Prowess deck today, as the name suggests, means it'll be white, blue, and red. We're looking at an average mana curve about 1.6, and we're going to be rocking 12 creatures, 16 instants, 4 sorceries, 2 artifacts, 6 enchantments, and 20 lands total. As the name implies, we're going to try to play a couple of key creatures in the deck that are going to get a massive boost in power as long as we keep casting a bunch of non-creature spells. We have a giant mix and match of instants, sorceries, artifacts, and enchantments, and thanks to a brand new mechanic that was added in from Dragonstorm, we'll also take advantage of that by then comboing off at least 2 spells every turn to get the most value out of the deck. By doing so, we'll not only go big, but we'll also go wide with a bunch of extra tokens. But you may be asking yourself right now, how can we pull this off on such a small budget of only 11 rares in the deck?
Good question!
Well, I'm glad you asked. So, without further ado, let's go over the deck and show you how it all works. Starting with the creatures in our deck, we'll use in the 1-drop slot Monastery Swiftspear, Jeskai Devotee in the 2-drop slot, and the 3-drop slot will be Monastery Mentor. Starting with Monastery Swiftspear here, she kicks us off with, of course, with Haste and Prowess, a long-time classic card that will get bigger and bigger whenever we cast non-creature spells and gets a +1/+1 pump until end of turn. Jeskai Devotee, however, is going to be brand new to us, and the main reason we have this card is while it doesn't get itself a giant pump like, say, the Swiftspear or even the Monastery Mentor, well, we want this primarily because this gives us an ability to help filter our mana by then paying 1 and then adjusting it for whatever we need to cast other spells. And then finally, Monastery Mentor is also an incredibly powerful game-ending finisher here. So let's talk about this card for just a moment. Monastery Mentor here is a 3-mana 2/2 human monk with Prowess. For those of you that forgot, Prowess means that whenever you cast a non-creature spell, this creature will get a +1/+1 pump until end of turn. But the real reason you do like this card is, it says whenever you cast a non-creature spell, not only will you get that Prowess pump, but you also get to create a 1/1 white monk creature token that also has Prowess.
Say what?
You can make a giant army of tokens literally out of nowhere and just overwhelm your opponent to hopefully beat them down. For the non-creature spells to support our game plan here, we'll start with the 1-drop slot with all of our instants and sorceries. In the 1-drop slot, we'll have Homestead Courage here. Puts a +1/+1 counter on a creature we control and also gives it vigilance until end of turn. The sweet part, of course, is the flashback ability allows us to, of course, to recast it one more time from the graveyard. We'll also utilize here Loran's Escape, gives any one of our artifacts or creatures hexproof and indestructible until end of turn for protection, and also allows us to scry 1. To help us with some extra card draw here, we'll also utilize Consider, allowing us to simply draw a card and Surveil 1. If we want to deal with anything on the field that our opponent may have, we also are going to utilize Into the Flood Maw here. By gifting them a tapped fish, we can then bounce back any one of their non-land permanents to their hand. If we don't want to deal with that, just simply bounce back the creature just the same. For protection from anything that may try to throw at us if they start tapping out, we can also utilize Spell Pierce here as our counter spell. And finally, to round out the package here, you knew we had to throw it in here, it's going to be Monstrous Rage. This instant allows us to give any one of our creatures a massive +2/+0 pump and a monster roll token, which means it also gets an extra +1/+1 pump with trample until end of turn. In the 2 and 3-drop slot, we'll have additional support here with our artifacts and enchantments. Starting in the 2-drop slot, we'll have Kori Steelcutter here. This is an absolute menace wherever you play it, but in our deck, it's actually going to be one of the most powerful cards we can play on a budget. So, for those that still don't know, Kori Steelcutter here is going to be a 2-mana artifact equipment. This is an equipped creature, gives +1/+1 and have trample and haste. With the flurry mechanic, that means that whenever we cast our second spell each turn, we get to create a 1/1 white monk creature token with Prowess, and you may attach this equipment to it. So I'm pretty sure I don't have to even explain how this card is absolutely broken, but of course in our deck, even with 2 copies, we could definitely go off with this and make a massive army of monk creature tokens. But to provide a little extra support for that, we'll also utilize here Reverberating Summons. Reverberating Summons is a 2-mana enchantment that simply says that at the beginning of each combat, if we've at least least casted 2 or more spells in a turn, this enchantment turns into a 3/3 monk creature with haste in addition to its other types until end of turn. Once you don't need this enchantment anymore, you can pay 2 mana, discard your hand, and sacrifice the enchantment to simply draw 2 more cards. Finally, to round out our whole package here in the 3-drop slot, 2 copies of Frostcliff Siege. If you didn't see my earlier video on the Temur Landfall deck, I highly recommend checking out why this card is included in the deck. But for those that are wondering, let's cover it once more. Frostcliff Siege is a 3-mana enchantment that reads that at this enchantment enters, you choose Jeskai or Temur. If you choose Jeskai, whenever one or more creatures we control deals combat damage, we get to draw a card. If we choose the Temur side, however, creatures we control get +1/+0 and have trample and haste. So similar to our previous game plan, what we're just going to do here is once we start going off and making a ton of monk creature tokens, with the Frostcliff Siege out, if we at least named Temur, they will all get that extra bit of pump with trample and haste. So that means we could do a massive swing of token damage out of practically nowhere if we set this up just correctly. As far as your mana base is concerned, it's going to be as simple as can be, but we did have a little extra room for some rare lands. Starting, however, with the basics, it's going to be 3 plains, 3 islands, and 3 mountains, so even across the board. And of course, we'll be able to afford now 1 Seachrome Coast, 1 Spire Bluff Canal, and 1 Inspiring Vantage for our rare dual lands. However, to make sure we can fix still just a little bit more, we'll also add in Mystic Monastery here. It's a tap land, but it's a tri-colored one, so this of course will help us out as the game progresses. And of course, to get out those remaining basics, we'll also utilize copies of Escape Tunnel here. If we time this correctly, however, and you don't need the extra lands, you can sacrifice it and give one of your target creatures with power 2 or less to be unblockable until end of turn. So time this right, then you should be able to then spell sling your way out of this to make an unblockable creature to hopefully just beat down your opponent out of nowhere. If you're a player that's interested in playing in best of 3, here's what I would recommend for you for the sideboard. We'll utilize copies of Tormod's Crypt here for Graveyard Hate, but it's also great because it is a free spell and it does count towards the Flurry mechanic and of course the Prowess ability that our deck has. For Artifact and Enchantment Hate, we want to stay as low to the ground as possible, so utilize copies of Fragmentize here to deal with our opponent's stuff, an extra copy of Spell Pierce, and an extra copy of Monstrous Rage depending on what you need to mix and match. For extra counter spells, we do need a little more support here. We can also bring in No More Lies here. We can counter a spell unless our opponent pays 3, but if they don't, we can exile that spell as well, keeping it off the field and the graveyard forever. To finish off our game plan, however, we need more stabilization. We'll also utilize Kori, Mountain Stalwart here. Anytime we activate the Flurry ability, this creature will deal 2 damage to an opponent, and also we can gain 2 life. And then finally, to round it out, of course, we had to throw in here for, of course, flavor purposes. It's going to be Jeskai Charm, a 3-mana instant that allows us to choose either to put a target creature on top of our opponent's library, or we can then deal 4 damage to their face or to a planeswalker, or we can give all of our creatures we control +1/+1 and lifelink until end of turn. Now with the deck tech out of the way, let's go ahead, let's cover tips and tricks I can give you to get the most value out of this deck. So, in the early game, you honestly only have one real creature to play, which is going to be that Monastery Swiftspear. However, even if you don't have that in hand, don't be afraid to utilize some of your other cards to kind of help get your game plan running. What I mean by that is, if you anticipate your opponent is going to have some stuff out there, you could do some tempo plays with some Into the Flood Maws, or start drawing cards with Consider to start ensuring that you can get to what you need to on time. Ideally, however, if you can get that Monastery Swiftspear down, you can start doing some early game damage, and there are even some matches where sometimes just the Swiftspear alone can get enough pump and power to just go through your opponent. After all, you can spell sling with her with cards such as your Homestead Courage to make sure she can be vigilant and also get stronger. Monstrous Rage can push through the remaining points of damage with Trample, and of course you can even use protection with her with Loran's Escape to make sure that your opponent cannot touch her. But if she needs a little extra support, that's where other cards come into play, such as your Kori Steelcolor, your Jeskai Devotee, and Reverberating Summons. You don't want to rely too much on Jeskai Devotee to actually do the massive damage. Realistically, that card can get some early game damage, but you're mostly having it there just to fix your mana to make sure you can cast everything on time. Reverberating Summons is great because this is a resilient card that can still survive even board wipes, because once it goes back to being an enchantment, unless your opponent has enchantment hate, you will always have at least access to it to either make it into a creature, or if you don't need it, just of course destroy it, and of course draw some extra cards to make sure you can keep your game plan going. Your biggest and strongest cards in the deck are going to be Kori Steelcutter and Monastery Mentor. These cards alone will make a massive army of tokens. And don't be afraid to utilize Loran's Escape to protect that Monastery Mentor, or even your Kori Steelcutter, from getting removed from the game. Also, depending on how your board state looks will depend on how you want to use Frostcliff Siege. If you're a little behind on card draw, name Jeskai to make sure you can get back into the fight. If you're already ready to go off, be sure to choose Temur, because once you can spell sling a little bit with that and Monastery Mentor, you're going to have a lot of hasty creature tokens that'll just smash their way through victory out of nowhere. This will of course lead us to the other major advantage this deck has. Once you can get a solid threat out and you're capable of protecting it, you'll be able to just overrun your opponent with the amount of value and the load to the mana curve that this deck provides. You can still stick to the flurry game plan of just casting off 2 spells a turn. However, once you will feel confident enough where you can push through damage, by all means, if you can start spell slinging and you know for sure victory is at hand, don't be afraid to be aggressive when you absolutely have to. The other major advantage of course this deck has is also you can utilize that tempo play if I just mentioned earlier to also be a little bit on the defensive side. Since we do make a ton of tokens, make sure to pay attention to when your tokens get some prowess pump, so this way you can either chump block something and sometimes trade out best, or at worst just chump block away a couple of extra points of damage and save yourself another turn to then rebuild and then redeploy. The biggest weakness of the deck is if your opponent has wraths and spot removal, your Monastery Swiftspear will feel very sad, and of course wraths will blow up everything that your monks were trying to do, especially because it takes one whole turn cycle in order for them to actually be effective. If your opponent can throw out there anything that stops your combo from going off, such as cards like High Noon, which prevent you from casting more than 1 spell a turn, then your deck is going to feel a little awkward and clunky, because until you can bounce away that card with, say, like your 1 of 2 copies of Into the Floodmaw, there's not really much else you can really do, and sometimes you may have to play around it, which is going to be very frustrating and at worst almost lose you the game if you just cannot get to your answers. But even with all of those issues that may come up throughout your match, if you're still a fan of what this deck is trying to do and you are interested in seeing how you can take it to the next level, give a shout out below in the comments, because if you've made it this far into the video, you are my true fiery friends, and because of that, you're about to see in just a moment how you can take this deck to the next level by investing a ton of extra rares and mythics into the deck. Now, in terms of upgrades to the deck and how to get more value out of it, here's what I would recommend for you to kind of take it to the next level. So, we're going to be cutting some of the reverberating summons and we'll make room for Slick Shot Show Off here. I'm pretty sure I don't have to explain to you that this card is absolutely bananas in a deck like this where you're spell slinging. Also, to kind of give us a little bit more ridiculousness to the deck, we're definitely going to be incorporating extra copies of Corey Steelcutter here. So this, of course, will just help us again go wide and go big with our whole game plan. But what if that's still not enough? Well, we're going to, of course, throw in the All-Star from Standard. It's going to be Storm Chaser's talent just as well. So we can definitely take advantage of it and splash white still to still maintain our own flair of it, if you will. Otherwise, the rest of the deck is just going to have some small modifications of ratios for different cards. So we're now going to throw in a whole set of Monstrous Rage. We'll cut back a little bit on Homestead Courage to fill in for the remainder space. And we'll also do some small tweaks that'll just help us ensure we can get a little bit more out of this deck when we're focused completely on just pumping and going wide and big. Now, in terms of upgrades, of course, to the mana base, should be no surprise, of course. We're going to throw in all of the fast lands, so Spire Bluff Canals completely, Sea Chrome Coast, and then a whole set of Inspiring Vantage. We'll throw in the Triomes, but honestly, this is not really a requirement. Otherwise, the only other upgradable for the lands will be a Fountain Port here, just to help round us out and just give us a little bit more card draw when we need to if we end up kind of drawing dead. As for upgrades to the sideboard here, we're going to throw in the remaining Into the Floodmaws here, so in case you do need some tempo plays, you can bring those out if you need to, but realistically, everything else can kind of stay the same, with one small tweak that I would recommend for you is adding in Boros Charm. This card is actually budget friendly as is, so you can throw it into the budget one already, but if you do want to, the reason why we're going to throw it here is, now that we're more focused on a type of deck that really wants to pump up our creatures and do a lot of damage, this actually does really good with the deck, because you can either do 4 damage to a player's face or Planeswalker, you can give all of your permanents indestructible, giving them some greater protection, or you can give one of your creatures like your 6-slot Show Off here, your Corey Steelcutter, whoever you want to, double strike until end of turn, which will allow you to really push through damage no matter what against any opponent. And with that all out of the way, here are my final thoughts that I want to give on the deck. While this deck does seem to tread a little bit of the similar ground that we showed you earlier with both the Mardu deck, the Sultai deck, and of course the other clans, I would definitely say when it comes to going big and going wide, no one does it better than Jeskai and the Prowess mechanic. So, to put this another way, if you're a fan of spell slinging, if you're a fan of combat tricks, and if you're a fan of also tempo plays where you can bounce something out of the way, out of nowhere, and just start pumping up your army of tokens, then I would definitely say, give this deck a try, and I assure you, when you manage to go super big and wide with Monastery Mentor, while also getting some support from your enchantments, you're going to have a lot of fun doing so, and you'll be very surprised at how you could pull that off even on the budget we had today, and when you manage to smash your way through, whether it's with that or even a Corey Steelcutter, you will definitely not be disappointed. That's all I have for you today. Thanks again for watching, everyone, and just remember that no matter what you do play in the game of life, always be sure to burn bright. Later.